Hey guys, it's Brandon with the Mama on the Rocks, and we are here again with Dr. Christine Browning as our expert for our expert interview for our Extreme Parenting Community and private group. And when we talked to Dr. Browning before, we were talking specifically about trauma, and that's a specialty area of hers, and I'll let her introduce herself here in a second. But she mentioned something called the Big Six, which are six sort of overarching ideas that we need to be implementing as parents in order to sort of create a healthy environment in which to raise our kids. So I wanted to come back to that and actually spend a whole interview on that, because I think they are not only just important concepts, but also can give us a little bit of grace as extreme parents as we sort of navigate raising rather difficult children behaviorally, because it sort of gives us space to mess up, which I really appreciate because I do it all the time. So I know Dr. Browning because she's one of my professors in my counseling program for grad school. I could talk to you all day about all the wonderful things about her. I really think she's a saint. So if I was a Catholic who could make you a saint, that would be like on my to-do list, but it's fine. I'm not, so sorry.
I'm glad. I'm glad.
So tell us about you, just about your credentials and why you're so passionate about training future counselors.
My credentials, I'm a licensed professional counselor with mental health service designation. I'm also a nationally certified counselor and a psych examiner, a senior psych examiner, which just is a fancy way of saying I have a lot of letters, but I can do enough to hurt myself sometimes. Hopefully not other people. I'm very interested in trauma training and training the next generation of counselors to do good trauma work, because I experienced a great deal of trauma as a child, what some might call ongoing trauma for many, many years. So I'm very passionate about making sure the next generation of counselors knows how to do that well and knows their own story well enough to be able to not let that get in the way.
That's powerful. One thing that I love that you talk about often is owning your story, recognizing in your own body not only where trauma affects you, but kind of recognizing how you're able to get through that, whatever that looks like for you, and sort of process that. And also, I think there's a lot to be said. We talk often about big T and little t trauma, but Dr. Browning has sort of, I feel personally, given me permission to recognize that you mentioned in your own story about sort of ongoing trauma. Those of us who are caregivers or who are extreme parents for our kids, whatever ages, and in this group we have parents who are still raising their adult children as well as littles, and so I think it's important for us to recognize that that is a trauma. That's something that we're exposed to every day. It's exhausting, it's a lot of work, it's very taxing physically, spiritually, emotionally, and so I think that's something that we easily dismiss and don't allow ourselves a lot of grace, which I mentioned before is one of the reasons why the Big Six was so appealing to me. And so I wanted to just spend a little more time kind of talking about that. If you would, to get us started on this, it sort of goes off the idea of attachment theory, which is just one of the bajillions of theories that I had to learn about last semester. Excuse me. But this was one that really interested me because not only because of my own childhood experiences, but also both an extreme child and a neurotypical child in the same household. And so can you just give us just a really brief overview of what attachment theory looks like as far as secure versus insecure and anxious and avoidant? Because I think those are really important, just sort of like key concepts to start with.
Secure attachment would incorporate the Big Six, and that would be a child who had a parent who gave you all of those things, not perfectly, but it was at least giving those things 50% of the time. So a good enough parent is a good enough parent. When you have any kind of neglect or drug abuse or any kind of trauma that the parent's going to, so that it affects those big six in different ways. And the parent is more attuned to themselves
Mm.
than they are to the child, and more trying to meet the needs of them, their own needs, than the needs of the child, then that's going to affect the attachment style in different ways. An avoidant attachment would be a child who has a parent that does not attune, that does not engage, um, and so they avoid getting attached, or they have an avoidant attachment and are afraid to then in their adult life get attached to others in a healthy way,
Mm.
because they've always been met with failure, they've
Yeah.
always been met with disappointment. um, and that's, we all have different attachment styles because of the way that we've been raised. And that's not just one parent. Then you've got two parents, and how did you attach to one as opposed to the other? So there may be avoidant with one parent and attachment with the other one, or vice versa, or both may give you avoidant attachment styles. You might also have chaotic,
Yeah.
and that's when the parent just doesn't attend at all. That's more neglectful or abusive than anything.
And we do
So,
have parents in this group who are foster parents and adoptive parents, and also parents who are raising biological children that have survived trauma. And so I do want, if you haven't already, or if you're new to the group, go back into the archive videos and watch Dr. Browning's first expert video, because it's just really insightful about trauma and what that looks like, and some red flags and some things like that. But I want to talk about attunement. That's the very first one. And that's the one that you told us in your previous video is the most important. And if I mean, literally like write it on my wall, paste it to my forehead, 50%, that idea of a good enough parent is a good enough parent.
yes.
And I cannot tell you how many times I've told myself that in my moments of just, I'm going to absolutely lose it on this kid.
Yeah.
Because no matter your child's ability level, every parent experiences that. I mean, parenting is hard. And so this attunement piece talks about that when a parent is distracted by their own needs, wants, emotions, and personal pain, they can't be attuned to their child's needs.
Right.
What might this look like? What might the difference look like between a parent who is attuned to their child's needs and a parent who's not attuned to their child's needs?
Okay, so I'll answer that first by asking you a question.
Okay.
What do you feel in your body when someone sees you?
Mm. It almost feels like the ultimate relief.
Okay.
Because there's some vulnerability involved, but at the same time, a safety.
Yes.
That paradox can exist at the same time.
Yes. And so that is a true attunement. And someone who's so wrapped up in their own trauma cannot truly see you, because right in front of their eyes are their own needs
Yes.
and their own dysregulation, if you will.
Yeah.
They can't get to the place where they can totally be attuned to what you need, which is what a parent needs to do for their child.
Yeah.
They need to see them. So when someone looks at me and gives me the attention, and I know I'm seen, when I say something and my husband just stops
Mm.
and he looks at me and says, tell me what's going on for you.
Mm.
That's attunement.
Yeah.
And that there's so much, as you said, relief and safety in that moment, because no matter what's going on for me, just that pause and attunement, knowing I'm seen, that in itself helps me regulate.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think as extreme children, that is arguably the thing they struggle with most, is that regulation piece. And we'll talk about that here in a minute in these big six. But I think as a parent, it's easy for us to, when you're parenting a child with extra needs, you put so much extra responsibility on yourself. And of course, there are logistics. There are medication needs and therapy and specialists and all these extra things, IEP meetings and educational needs. However, we're still humans and we still mess up. We still get frustrated and stressed out by regular life. And so I think for me, I want to give you guys just a practical piece of information that goes back to Dr. Browning's just kind of insight to me this semester about where I feel things in my own body. So I became more aware of the fact that because my work is all online, I might be looking at my phone in the evening and I might be responding to emails. I might be checking my grades. I might be posting something that's an article for the Today Show that I had due or something like that. And my kids don't know that. They probably just think I'm watching a video like my husband does because he uses his phone for different things than I do. And so that's a trigger for me. I can get very frustrated because I am in tune with my needs right now. They are literally and physically in front of my face. I have to get this done. But so it's not enough to just be physically present with them in that moment. And so I think that's a really fine line for us to understand. If we're doing these things 50% of the time, then we are a good enough parent for our children. And we'll get to here in a minute, being able to recognize and own when you mess up with your kids. And that's it. We talk about that in this group a lot. That's a huge thing. So there are times where I'll snap on my kids because I'm like, good grief, I've said it 30 times. Like, just give me 5 minutes to do this. But then I need to come back and say, I didn't need to speak to you in that way. And I'm sorry, and ask for forgiveness. Understand mommy was really doing something for work. I wasn't trying to ignore what you needed to do. So all of these big six kind of tie together. They're linked.
Yeah, so what you're talking about right there is repair. And when there's rupture, snapping, and you can come back and repair, that is very powerful. Some of my best moments as an instructor, as a professor, have been when I've messed up in class or let my needs get in front of my students' needs and been dysregulated and not handled it well.
Right.
Ignoring it and just going on acting like it didn't happen is not a good thing.
Right.
But coming back and owning that, then there's more intimacy there when you can come back and repair.
And I think it's empowering for both sides. It's good.
Yes.
It's relief to feel forgiven, and it's also powerful for that person to understand that they can forgive you for that.
Yeah, and that's just another form of attunement.
Right.
Because you see what you've done to your children.
Yeah.
You can come back and repair.
Number 2 is responsiveness. So I put, and my note says, this is big for extreme kiddos. So it talks about when you as the child are distressed, mad, afraid, sad, how did your parents respond to you? Did they comfort and care and approach you with kindness, or did they get dysregulated themselves? And we see this a lot in different parenting styles within the home. So you talk about there could be attachment styles different between the two parents, even with the same child. And so tell us a little bit about what might be positive responsiveness, because our kids get dysregulated a lot. Like, it's not a neurotypical child may struggle with a couple of things a day. This is like a constant roller coaster in our home every day, all day.
So responsiveness, I think you pointed out one of them. When you're busy on your phone or on the computer and trying to get your work done, what is your response? It's not one of attention or attunement. It can be, not always, but it can be snappy.
Sure.
And you're dysregulated, so you're responding in a dysregulated fashion. And part of our job as parents is the ability to regulate your own arousal so you can teach that to your children. So when they're dysregulated and you're dysregulated, it's like a crescendo of dysregulation, and it just creates more stress on both ends. Yeah. So when you can even stop and say, you know what, I just need a minute. Give mom just a minute. And even if they're screaming and temper tantrum and whatever's going on extremely, you still, in order to respond, you need to get yourself under control.
That's right.
So a way to practice your own self-regulation. What do you need to soothe? What is it that you need? Do you need to walk downstairs and back up the stairs again? Do you need to just, put your apron over your head like
Mhm.
Um, who was it? Susan, the Methodist preachers. Anyway, his mother would put her apron over her head and just say, "When I come out from under my apron, I'll talk to you." Um, but you need to regulate before you can help them regulate.
Yeah, and we talk a lot in this group about having a safe space in our home, and not only for our kiddos, for every person in your household. Because it's important that everyone understands that everyone has those needs and those moments of overwhelm. And you should be able to, we call it in our house, take time. And anyone in our household at any time in the middle of an argument can ask to take time. I need to
Yeah.
take. So I think creating those expectations, and then also just understanding kids will mirror behavior, even our kids who are nonverbal. And so if we respond to our kids, we're talking about responsiveness, if we respond to them with our own dysregulation, with yelling or screaming or whatever that looks like for you in those dysregulated moments, then it's almost, it should be expected that our kids may mirror those behaviors. So it shouldn't be a surprise to us when they then yell back.
Yes.
I think a lot of us, especially in my age group and older, we were brought up, well, you just respect the parent because they're the adult. You don't get to ask questions. You don't get to have an explanation or understand a why. And that's hard for kids. And so I think it's important that we understand that it's okay that we mess up and that's going to happen and we ask for forgiveness. However, they may mirror our behavior more than we wish they would sometimes.
Yeah.
Um,
I have a really great example of that with my middle son when he was about 11, 12 years old. So he was 12, the older one was 14, and Christy was 10. So he was Christy and Matt, the 12 and 10-year-old, were in the hallway, and he was yelling at her and stomping his feet, and he slammed the door and he said something mean to her. And I'm stirring spaghetti in the kitchen. So I put down my spaghetti spoon and I stomp down the hallway and I yell at him and I slam the door, telling him not to stomp, scream, slam, right? So I go back to stirring my spaghetti, very calmly. I handled that. Boy, I did a good job.
mhm.
He comes very respectfully around the corner and he looks at me and he says, "Mom, if you're going to tell me," and he's very calm,
Mhm.
"not to stomp, scream, or slam, then you shouldn't either." It's like, oh,
Oh. We've had those moments for sure.
okay, who's the parent here?
Yeah, those are the very sobering parental
Oh
moments.
yeah, oh yeah.
Um,
Um,
Number 3 is engagement. And I wanted to talk about this because it talks about, were our parents willing and able to engage with us on a heart level? And it even goes further to say, were you pursued by your parents? Did they want to know you as a person? And I think that's something that we don't talk about a lot in Western culture, in our homes. It's not typical. So what does this look like practically? Because I would say engaging with your kids is doing homework with them, playing a game with them, but that's not really necessarily a heart level. So what does that look like? What should engagement look like?
okay, again, Matt, my middle child. I learned how to pray with Matt. I stayed on my knees most of the time. Um, when he was a teenager in high school, he had really long Kenny G, and I don't know if you know who that is, hair. I mean, beautiful, just wavy. Christy used to get mad at him and say, "Mom, why is my hair so straight? This is so beautiful and curly." And he was in a rock band, a Christian rock band, and he'd bang his head and do things, um, and he wore just unusual clothing. He's an artist.
Mm-hmm,
That's just, and he's got his own little person.
mm-hmm.
And so the teachers used to look at me and say, "Oh, you're Matt Browning's mom," with, sarcasm or whatever. It wasn't a good thing,
Yeah.
And of course, in the church,
Even more.
you have this other realm of expectation and um, not attunement, if you will, but rule. You got to follow the rules. And we let Matt choose his own clothes, wear his long hair, um, and really encourage his creativity
Mm,
because that's who he is.
yes.
And I came to know that the verse, raise up a child in the way he should go, and he will not depart from it. That doesn't mean yank a child into the life you want him to live.
Oh, that's good.
That means know your child and call out, cooperate with God in calling out the gifting that's in them. That's way different than
Mm,
raising them the way you want them to turn out.
that's right.
Um, and that's true of any parent, but particularly with children who are extreme or exceptional
Mhm.
or gifted or
Yes.
handicapped in one way or another. There is a unique gifting of that child. And so the engagement is to know and pursue what is that gifting
Yeah.
and not be afraid of it and not be dismissed by it yourself, not be all in a panic because you don't know what to do with it.
Mhm.
Just cooperate and ask questions.
Right.
You know, wow, that's really a neat song you just wrote.
Mhm.
Tell me about that. Tell me about where that came from for you.
Right. Yeah, so nurturing, recognizing and nurturing those giftings is huge. And
Yeah.
I know have extensively taught with sort of difficult populations. And one thing I used to always tell my classes is, I don't care if you want to be a garbage man or a CEO, but be the best you can be at it and be proud of it every day.
Yeah.
Because I think that empowers them to realize no matter where my path in life takes me, I have choices. Even if I'm flipping burgers because I got kids to feed, then
Yeah.
I can go and do that and be the best at it and find something I love. So one thing I think is cool is we have a lot of kids in here who, like my son is twice exceptional. We have several in here who have 2E diagnoses as well as who are on the spectrum and have some sort of like, or are OCD and have very specific interests. There are several who are really into space, several who are very into dinosaurs. Nurture that. Maybe they want to be a paleontologist and they'll be smarter than I ever will in my life. I have more money than I'll ever see, and it'll be wonderful. So yeah, I think kind of just encouraging those things. There's a lot of power in that. Okay, so this next one is a heavy hitter in extreme households, my own specifically as well. Number 4 is the ability to regulate your arousal. So this refers to bodily sensations that you feel inside during moments of distress. So as the child and as the parent, was your parent attuned enough to you to effectively regulate you when you get dysregulated? And I wrote down, what if we are and what if we aren't? What might that look like? And then again, going back to the differing parenting styles, is this why two different parenting styles in the same household can elicit very different responses from the same child? So my husband is on this group a lot with me, and we talk very openly that we were raised very differently and we parent very differently. And that is the thing that we talk about in counseling most, that we argue about the most, that
Hmm.
I mean, really struggle and process through and wrestle with. He gets bothered by every little thing. That he struggles hard with that with our son. Whereas I can dismiss a lot of things, but I can go 0 to 100 a lot faster. So my temperature gauge is a lot more sensitive than his. But because I am naturally more nurturing, my son responds way differently to me than to my husband. So can you talk to us about what that different regulation and that arousal might look like in a household with two
Well,
different?
I think you describe it well. And for my parenting style, mine is I'm more like you. I can get dysregulated easily. It's taken me years to understand how to regulate myself, how to even listen to my body and know what is happening inside of me. What does the clench in my gut mean?
Mm-hmm.
What does the pounding head mean? What does the I can't take it anymore? What does that mean? That's just right on the tip of my
Oh
tongue.
yeah.
So somebody described Tom and I, my husband Tom and I, like I'm the lightning in the sky and he's the Mississippi River. That's just very steady. You got it. strong current can take you under and drown you, but he's steady. And
Mhm.
I'm like this. So, um, it's, but he's so steady that he does not exhibit much emotion.
Yes.
So he's just kind of there and
Mhm.
steady. Our parenting style, we agreed early on to always stand together when
Mhm.
we parent. So whatever it is that we're in disagreement about, we we agreed before we even had kids that we would present a united front, so we wouldn't be working against each other, if you will. Um, what the kids have learned to do is if they're excited or they want somebody that's going to go, oh yeah, that's just woo, they'll come to me
Yeah.
because they know I'll get excited and
Mhm.
whatever. Um, and flip side of that is I'm also emotional when something goes wrong,
Mhm.
you know, and he isn't.
Right.
So he balances me out, but I balance him out too. And I think it's being comfortable with what your arousal structure is and knowing what it is and
Right.
knowing where it came from. Now that, that's a lot of work around that.
Right.
But understanding that you go from 0 to 10 like that is understanding your arousal structure.
Right.
So if your child wakes up on a day and it's, before their feet even hit the floor, this is going to be one of those days,
Mhm.
then it's almost like you have to talk to yourself, okay, I recognize that this day is also going to be a hard one for me
Right.
because my arousal structure is already engaged in knowing and anticipating what's
Yes.
going to happen. Um, and and so it's recognizing and knowing yourself enough that then you can help them, and even being honest, in a relationship with your husband or with friends, I'm really in a hard place today. Mommy is really um, on edge today, or mommy really knows that this is going to be a hard day for me because my heart is pounding. How
Mhm.
are you feeling today?
Yes.
What's going on for you today? Can we kind of work together today?
Mhm.
Because I know it's going to be a hard day for both of us.
Yes. I think changing the narrative is huge and very powerful. And I know there are people in this group who are single parents, divorced, live with their own parents, and so you have a different, I will say, parenting partner. So there may be another person in the home that also helps to parent your child. So it's important to have those that communication so that you are a united front in front of your children. However, being able to say, like I say to my husband, I'm really having a hard time today, but I will say to my kids, they call it my anxiety. Mommy, you have anxiety? Yeah, I'm having some anxiety today. And so I will say to them, it's truly only since I met you, and you talk so much about just the somatic feelings and what is it in your body that is triggered and how does that feel? And I'll say, put your hand right here. Do you hear how mommy's heart is pounding? Do you feel that? What does it feel like in your body? And oh, it feels like I'm getting really hot and I just need to take a break for a minute. Do you want to go breathe with me or do you want to go play while I do that? And then just kind of again changing that narrative and making it safe and not threatening to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it also sort of gives them, I've seen that it's empowered my son to be more open when he's feeling that instead of needing to jump straight to anger, because he is seeing other ways to express when he's approaching those feelings instead of having that quick jump.
And what you're doing is teaching them to regulate their arousal. And you're doing that by teaching yourself as well. So you're mirroring those mirror neurons, you're mirroring what they need to learn, which is one of the most valuable things for a child is to learn how to regulate their own emotions.
Yeah. Number 5 is strong enough to handle your negative emotions. And it talks about how as children, we needed to be able to have the freedom to express when we didn't feel good, when we needed to cry or be ragey or be quiet. And so it's important for us to first address how were we addressed as children when our emotions were big and negative, and then how how do we now portray that to our children. So what I mean by that is to say I know now as an adult, emotions are very uncomfortable for me. It is very difficult for me to identify emotions outside of anger and like laughing, like happiness, being fun. That was the only safe and functional two things in our household. So crying didn't get me anything but in more trouble. And so it didn't make sense to cry. So I shut that down real quick. But it now is hard as an adult, as a female who's expected to emote more, and I don't. And so that is difficult. And so my question for you in this is, what if we ourselves were shut down as children when we had these big emotions? Is this an example of trauma? What should that look like? Or are there ways for us to course correct so that we don't repeat that with our own children?
Great, great, great question. And yes, it is a way for you it is a response to trauma, and it is a way for you then you see the work you need to do, right? So you have to know your own story. You have to know, because it shows up everywhere. It's made you who you are. So what was the treatment of you? Like, I was invisible. Nobody saw me, nobody cared. Or I was consumed by my parents in order to meet their needs.
Sure.
So it's important to recognize that. So since that was my experience, then it's my responsibility to go back to that little child that I was and reparent them. And in the process of reparenting myself, then I can learn how to parent my child. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So yes, I was shut down. No one heard me. Just go away and do your own thing over there because we don't want to hear. It's very important for me then to know that be the parent you needed. In other words,
Yes.
so I am very prone to feel dismissed by students, by colleagues, and I need to recognize that you know that shows up in my body, and
Yeah.
I get tense. So I need to recognize, okay, this is what's going on. I'm not there, I'm here. That's not the same experience. These people are not against me. So it's just kind of reparenting yourself enough to know then how to parent your child.
Right. And I want to go back to the big and little T trauma because I think that's something that is brought up in this group a lot. I was not, let's say, sexually abused or beaten in my household, but there was emotional and verbal abuse in my household. So I would be very dismissive of my own childhood experiences to say, well, this is crazy. I shouldn't be struggling with this. But it is not. It is my experience. It is valid for me. And there are times where I desperately wish I could experience certain emotions or express certain things that I sincerely get almost physically paralyzed to do as an adult. And so I want you guys to hear that when you're watching this on playback. I want you to hear whatever your experience was absolutely valid. And comparing your experience to someone else is going to do you no good.
No good. It's comparison is death.
Yes. And your child is not you. And so you need to reparent the child you were. So I'm hearing Dr. Browning say, reparent the child you were, but also recognize that the child you have doesn't necessarily have the same needs that you did because they're not being raised the same.
Right.
So you may have done a lot of work and learned how to regulate yourself more readily than your own parents did. And so you don't have to be as concerned with certain things, whereas maybe you need to be more concerned with other areas. And your child isn't the same as you. So my kids' interests and I need to nurture made no sense to me as a kid because I wasn't the same. So I think that's a sort of delicate balance and understanding that. And then I want to the last one is willingness to repair. And I can't talk about this enough because I just think as humans in Western culture, we have really just been taught to like power through, just get it done and, be efficient and spend as little time. And I am so guilty of that. However, with our kids, they are tiny humans. They are learning to navigate this big world, and we put a lot of expectations on them that are usually not necessarily age appropriate. And so this talks about a healthy, trusting attachment is not built on the absence of failure. 100% of us will
Yay!
not happen. And like, if you mess up, guess what? You're normal. Congratulations.
Yes, you're human.
But it talks about it's based on the willingness to parent and to own and rectify those failures when they happen. So my question is, or what I'd like you to expand on a little bit, is what should this look like? Because as extreme parents, we mess up or lose it often. I think we feel like much more often than neurotypical parents, which by the way, isn't probably true. It's just our reality. But because our children dysregulate so often, and because their needs are so much greater most of the time than a neurotypical child, we feel like we can become dysregulated more often. And so we snap or lose it, or, you know, call it anything you want. So what should this repair look like for us?
So I'll go back to my example with Matt and stirring the spaghetti, and his admonition to me that I shouldn't stomp, scream, and slam if I'm trying to tell him not to do the same. So, you know, and then he went back to his room, and I'm stirring spaghetti, and I thought, God, that was your voice. And so I'm laying down my spaghetti spoon, and I very quietly walked to his room and opened the door, and I said, you know, Matt, you're exactly right. I was wrong to do that. And thank you for showing me the truth, and I'm sorry.
Mm,
And that is, it's just, you have to have humility in
yes.
it. And so if story, I think part of the ability to repair is recognizing that there's fear involved when you do mess up, right? So, oh, you know, they need it's just kind of grander. The grander the need of the child, the grander it feels when you don't do it, if you will, right.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, I'm just going to ruin them. You know, I can't do anything right. It just goes to an extreme because you're in an atmosphere of extreme all the
Mm-hmm.
time. You know, you're living in that trauma all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So the first to yourself to say, you know, I'm a good enough parent. I'm a good enough parent.
Mm-hmm.
And every parent messes up, and I'm going to go in there and do what I need to do in humility to let my child know that I love them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, Mama messed up again, and so here I know you're tired of hearing me say I'm sorry. They're not,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to come from, okay, it's okay to repair.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to be human,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
think in this generation of raising kids, we often fear that we'll raise entitled children because that's a huge topic right now. And that's a way to practice that humility and to model to our kids what it looks like to not think that you're the best at everything, and to recognize that you're fallible and that you're going to mess up. And what do you do when that happens, not if it
right,
happens?
right.
And then the other thing I wanted to point out that you had mentioned, in our house, we talk a lot in this group about intentional vocabulary. So of course we talk about person's first language, which is super important as you're advocating for your child's needs. However, another part of that is, like, in our house, we don't say, I'm sorry, it's fine. We say, will you forgive me? And then we talk about forgiveness. Now, part of that is based in our faith, but also it's a part of, it is up to that person, and we are in humility asking for forgiveness. We're not
Mhm,
dismissing what was done, because I think a lot of us that maybe we've had a trauma, or maybe somebody's really betrayed us in our life,
mhm,
and we don't want to forgive them because it feels like it's making it permissive, like we're allowing them to have done this thing to us, when really
mhm.
it's so not that. And so I think even just using that intentional vocabulary with your kids at their ability level is really empowering and really important, because, um, again, it goes back to that modeling, that behavior. Uh, Before we get done here, I would love for you just to speak just for a minute about the 50%, because I know we mentioned it in the beginning, but I really cannot tell you guys when you're watching this. I know you guys take notes and you ask me questions, and I love that. But if anything, if you don't hear anything else in this, hear this. If you only do parenting right 50% of the time, and that attunement piece is the most important. So I would just love to hear your last kind of comments on those two ideas, because I think those are really big takeaways for this.
Well, I think it goes even back to the last thing you talked about, Bryn, that facing somebody with humility and that forgiveness piece. Kids don't, and we don't, just forgive and forget. You know, people say forgive and forget, just forgive and forget. Well, you might apologize to your kids, they might extend forgiveness, but they may not forget, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you go back and talk about it again and again and again if they need to? And yes, that good enough parent. And this is from a religious perspective, but we have a perfect parent in God. Okay, perfect parent. He attunes, he forgives, he repairs, he does all the work,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how many of us are perfect children?
Zero.
Zero. Zero. So with a good enough parent, there's still going to be disruption. There's still going to be things, we do wrong, they do wrong. But it's like that thread of grace for each other. You look at your children with grace and say they're not going to be, they're a good enough child. Given what they have going on, yes. They are not going to be perfect, even if I'm perfect.
Right.
So turn that around to yourself and a good enough parent. I mean, the fact that you want to do well, that's a good enough parent. The fact that your desire is toward your child and to do well by them, that's a good enough parent. That's a parent who comes from a place of love and nurturing and understanding and humility, whether you feel that today or not.
Right. Yeah, I read once before about what if our greatest fear as a parent is that our child will become the worst things about us, or the things we interpret as the worst things about us. And so I think that goes back to parenting the child that you have, and first recognizing your own needs and maybe the places where you need to do some work, because we're all the time learning and growing, just our kids and us.
Yes.
And so I think it's easy for us as extreme parents to have a heart for advocating for our children, because in society they can be seen as sort of less than. But if we think about that parent-child relationship, especially in Western culture, oftentimes we think we are, maybe subconsciously, we think we're better than our children just because we're the parent, but that's really not the case. We're both just humans trying to figure this out. None of us if you've written the book on it, please tell me, because I'd love to read it. I am not an expert, nor do I claim to be, but I think being able to parent out of authenticity,
yes,
it gives your children and your friends and your circle kind of ownership over the places where they mess up, and it gives them permission to experience that in a really true and authentic way.
Yeah, I think the word authenticity is really sums it up. Because if you're trying to convince yourself that you're good enough, or trying to convince your kids you're good enough, you're not being authentic.
True.
Also, if you think you're a failure all the time and you'll never be good enough, you're not being authentic. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So just recognize, yeah, you're broken. Yeah, everyone is in some way. Some of us more than others, but that just makes us want to do a better job at, or know ourselves better, so we can be more authentic. I mean, that's the goal, really.
Well, as always, I could listen to you talk all day. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being willing to share your time. I know it's so valuable. And I hope that you guys that are watching this on playback write it down. If you write nothing else down, write it yourself a little note that just says 50%. Put it on your mirror, put it on your desk, put it in your refrigerator, wherever you're going to see it the most often, because
Put
truly,
it on your forehead.
I think we need to get matching tattoos. 50%, we can do it, 50%. But yeah, I think that's just a really powerful message with a lot of permission and a lot of grace that we fail to give ourselves. And it's really just, it should be a part of our nature to do so. It should be an organic thing we do. So thank you so much, Dr. Browning. If you guys have watched this and come up with specific questions, feel free to email me or message me. And if I don't know the answer, I will ask Dr. Browning and I will try to get that for you. So thank you again. I hope you have an awesome day. I can't wait to see you on Tuesday.
Oh, I know. I'm excited.
I'll see you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.